The room fell quiet as Naomi Carter lifted her microphone. The lights caught the sharp line of her jaw, her expression unreadable. Across the stage, Brandon Kingsley stood frozen, his pitch just completed. He didn't expect to see her, especially not sitting in that chair judging him. Naomi looked straight at him and said calmly but with unmistakable weight, "Some people chase power. I invest in purpose." The crowd didn't know what just happened, but Brandon did. And so did she. It had been 5 years since Naomi Carter last saw Brandon Kingsley. 5 years since that afternoon at West Hill Cafe, the kind of day that leaves a mark even if you don't realize it right away. Back then, Naomi was just a name on a cheap apron and a tired smile behind a counter. She worked morning to night, saving every dollar she could in hopes of one day affording art school. Her world was small, but real: rent notices on the fridge, sketchbooks under the mattress, and a chipped mug she drank coffee from while studying other people's success stories online. West Hill Cafe sat on the edge of downtown LA, slick, expensive, and always humming with power suits and weekend convertibles. It wasn't a place Naomi belonged in, but it paid better than most jobs, and it gave her a front row seat to the life she was trying to earn. She first saw Brandon when he walked in with his friends, laughing like they owned the building, and maybe they did in a way. Brandon didn't just enter a room, he altered its gravity. People looked. People adjusted themselves in his presence. Naomi didn't. She was too busy cleaning a table, too used to pretending people like him didn't exist. But Brandon noticed her. More accurately, he noticed what she could be to him: a challenge, a game, something to prove. She was stunning in a way that didn't beg for attention, and that made her irresistible to someone like him. He turned to his friends and said it like it was nothing. "If I can get her to fall for me in 30 days, I win." They laughed, nodded, raised their coffee cups. No one questioned it. It wasn't the first time they'd made a bet like this. He returned the next day alone, softer, more approachable. He asked for the drink she made, best complimented, her art pin, said his name was just Brandon, left out the Kingsley part. Said he was figuring things out, starting something new, not sure where life was headed. Naomi didn't open up right away, but he knew how to wait. Over the next few weeks, he slipped into her routine like he'd always been there. He asked about her dreams, and when she said she loved drawing people in public places, he said, "That's rare. Most people only see what's loud." She started looking forward to seeing him. His presence felt easy, like a song you didn't realize you were humming until someone turned the volume down. And then one day he left her a small sketchbook with a note on the first page: "The world is loud. Don't let it drown out your voice." That night, Naomi stayed up drawing until sunrise. What she didn't know then was that every soft moment, every kind word, every carefully crafted line in the story of them was designed to lead her here to a cliff she didn't know she was standing on. She wouldn't realize it until it was too late, until the moment he turned her heart into a punchline. But that would come later. For now, Brandon smiled at her across the counter like he saw something worth holding on to. And Naomi, for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to believe that maybe someone really did. Brandon kept showing up, same time, same booth near the window. He started asking about her sketches sometimes, bringing books about art and design, claiming he just happened to have them lying around. He said he admired people who chased their dreams, who didn't give up just because the world told them no. Naomi didn't know what to do with that kind of attention. It felt foreign but also warm. She told herself not to get carried away. Still, she started bringing her sketchbook to work, keeping it in her bag just in case he asked to see something again. He never rushed her. He didn't try to impress her with flashy stories. In fact, he played small, told her he was building something of his own, nothing big, yet just a startup idea he was figuring out. Naomi assumed he was like her, hustling, trying to make a name without shortcuts. That made her let her guard down a little more each time. She found herself smiling when she saw him walk in, her steps lighter, her answers softer. He started staying longer sometimes until closing time. On quiet nights, they'd sit across from each other after her shift, sipping coffee, talking about the weird things they noticed about people. She told him how she liked drawing strangers because they didn't expect anything from her. He told her he liked talking to her because she wasn't trying to impress anyone. Neither of them knew how ironic that was. One night he walked her to the bus stop. She was embarrassed, her shoes were worn, her hoodie borrowed from her roommate, but he didn't seem to care. "You've got a real way of seeing the world, Naomi," he said. "That's rare." And she believed him, because he looked at her like he meant it, like he saw her not as a waitress or a project, but as a person worth knowing. He brought her a potted plant for her birthday, a little cactus, said it was tough like her. She laughed, blushed, thanked him in that shy, grateful way that made her look younger than she was. He watched her carefully like he was memorizing the moment. But behind that smile, behind every kind word, was a timer ticking down. What Naomi didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that every compliment had been weighed, every gesture calculated. Brandon was keeping score. His friends were still in the loop. The text thread was still active. The bet was still on. And yet somewhere in the middle of pretending, something shifted in him too. He found himself replaying their conversations after he left. He stopped responding to the group chat as much. He told himself it was just to make it feel more real so he could win the bet more convincingly, but even he wasn't sure anymore. He started to wonder what would happen if he told her the truth. If maybe they could start again without the lie. But the more he thought about it, the more afraid he became that telling her would mean losing her entirely. So he stayed quiet. Let it keep rolling. Told himself it was just a game until it wasn't. Naomi, meanwhile, was falling. Not fast, not loud, but fully. She found herself thinking of him in the middle of the day, sketching him when she was alone, listening for the bell on the cafe door, hoping it would be him. She'd never said the words out loud, not even to herself, but in her chest they pulsed with a quiet, terrifying rhythm. She was falling in love, and Brandon was almost at day 30. He could feel it coming, could see it in her eyes. He knew the moment was close, the one where she would finally say it, where her heart would land fully in his hands. And when it did, he'd have a choice to make. But the thing about choices is, not making one is still making one. And Brandon, as usual, was running out of time without realizing it. He didn't know the exact moment Naomi stopped holding back, but he felt the shift. Maybe it was the way she lingered a little longer during their talks, or how her eyes stayed on his, even when she smiled. There was a quiet trust building between them, real vulnerable, and completely outside the script he'd rehearsed in his head. It scared him more than he expected. He told himself this was still about the bet, that it had always been about the bet, that even if it started to feel like more, that didn't mean it was. But each time she laughed at something only he would say, or when she shared a small memory from her childhood, like it was a gift he had to unwrap carefully, that lie got harder to believe. And Naomi had no idea she was walking straight into the heart of something designed to break her. One night she brought him a drawing. It wasn't anything grand, just a simple pencil sketch of two people sitting at a table, coffee cups in hand, facing each other like they were the only two left in the world. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. Naomi bit her lip nervously, watching his reaction. "It's us," she said finally, voice soft. "Sort of." Brandon looked up, eyes searching hers. "Why me?" he asked before he could stop himself. She hesitated. Then, with the quiet courage that only comes when you've stopped guarding your heart, she answered, "Because with you, I don't feel small. I don't feel like I have to shrink myself to be seen." He didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. And worse, he hadn't earned it. Not really. That night, he didn't text his friends. He stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering how deep he'd fallen into something he was never supposed to feel. But by morning, the fear had won again. He told himself he was too far in to back out now. That ending, it would hurt her either way, so better to just finish what he started. Let it be done. And so he made a plan. The next day, Brandon showed up at the cafe before Naomi's shift ended. He told her he had a surprise, something he'd been working on for her. Naomi was hesitant. Surprises weren't something she was used to, but the way he smiled, the way he reached for her hand and squeezed it gently, made her trust that maybe this time the surprise was something good. He told her to meet him at the cafe after closing, that he'd arranged something special. She nodded, cheeks flushed, heart beating so hard it made her dizzy. She spent that evening second-guessing everything, her outfit, her hair, whether she should have worn perfume. Her roommate teased her gently. Naomi didn't even try to deny it. For the first time in her life, she let herself believe that love, real, reciprocated love, was finally knocking on her door. When she arrived back at the cafe, it looked different. Candles on the table where they always sat, a bouquet of wildflowers resting in a jar, a small speaker playing low jazz in the background, and Brandon waiting in the center of it all, hands tucked in his pockets, looking nervous but proud. She walked toward him, smile trembling on her lips. He reached out and took her hands. "I've wanted to say this for a while," he said. "Naomi, will you be my girl?" Naomi blinked, heart thudding so hard she thought it might give out. She bit her lip, nodded slowly, and whispered, "Yes." For a second, everything went still. Perfect. Pure. And then he laughed. Not a soft laugh. Not one of surprise or relief. No, he burst into full, loud, open-chested laughter. Naomi stared at him, confused. "What?" she started. But before she could finish, the cafe door opened and his friends poured in, clapping, hooting, pulling out their phones to record. Brandon turned to her, still laughing. "You actually said yes. Wow. That's it, guys. Bet's over. I won." Naomi's world stopped. The music didn't. The candles still flickered, but everything inside her collapsed at once. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, just stood there surrounded by laughter, while the person she thought she could trust reduced her entire heart to a punchline. And Brandon, he didn't look proud. He didn't even look happy. He just looked empty. Naomi didn't remember walking out. She didn't remember how the door opened, or how the night air hit her skin, or how her legs kept moving when her heart had completely stopped. All she knew was that she couldn't breathe in there. Couldn't hear anything over the sound of that laugh playing on loop in her head. That laugh and the way he'd said it, "I won." She walked for blocks without realizing where she was going, eyes blank, hands clenched so tight, the bouquet of wildflowers was now just a crumpled mess of stems and broken petals. People passed her, some looking, most not. Just another girl walking through LA at night. No one saw the pieces falling off her as she moved. When she finally got back to her apartment, she didn't cry. Not right away. She just sat on the floor, the flowers in her lap, her back against the fridge. The cheap overhead light buzzed softly above her, the silence pressing in from every wall. Then came the shaking. Not from cold, not from fear, just something inside her giving way like a dam she didn't know she was holding back. The tears followed slowly, like her body didn't quite trust them yet. She cried for the humiliation, for the betrayal, for being so naive. But more than that, she cried because for the first time in a long time, she had let herself hope. And hope, when ripped away like that, doesn't leave quietly. The next morning, Naomi didn't go to work. She didn't go the day after that either. She turned off her phone, deleted social media, avoided the cafe like it was cursed. Her roommate left a note on the fridge. "You don't have to talk, just breathe. I'm here." Naomi couldn't even look at it without her chest tightening. For days she stayed in that apartment, curled up in bed or sitting on the floor surrounded by sketchbooks she couldn't open. Every drawing reminded her of him, his compliments, his fake admiration, the way he said she saw the world differently. Lies. All of it. And yet, deep down, a part of her refused to disappear. It started with her old sketchbook, the one he never saw. The pages were worn, the corners curled, but they were hers, pure, untouched by him. On the last blank page, she picked up a pencil and drew not him, not them, just a girl sitting alone on a park bench. Wind blowing through her hair, eyes closed but peaceful. She drew like she was trying to remember who she was before him. And in doing that, she began to remember what mattered. By the end of that week, Naomi started looking into online art programs. She didn't have the money for a fancy degree, but there were workshops, scholarships, virtual mentorships. It wasn't much, but it was something. Something she could claim as hers. She started taking commissions on a freelance platform, drawing portraits and personalized illustrations. It was slow at first. One job here, 2 jobs there. But people started noticing her style, raw, emotional, deeply human. She opened a small Instagram account. No selfies, just her art. No names, just the stories behind each piece: heartbreak, survival, rediscovery. She didn't mention Brandon. Didn't need to. Her work spoke louder than revenge ever could. Followers trickled in, then hundreds, then thousands. Comments poured in. "This made me cry. I feel seen. This is exactly how I felt when he left." Naomi realized something. Her pain wasn't just hers. It was universal. And through her art, she could turn that pain into power, not just for herself, but for others too. She picked up extra jobs to pay for a creative boot camp. learned branding, marketing, storytelling, started pitching her own projects, collaborating with mental health organizations and community artists. She wasn't healed yet, but she was healing. And with each new piece, with each message from a stranger who felt understood because of her work, she grew more certain she didn't need Brandon's approval or anyone's to be worthy. She didn't need anyone to believe in her dreams. She just needed to stop giving her light to people who wanted to dim it. 1 year after the night everything fell apart, Naomi launched her own platform, a digital art studio, aimed at telling real stories from unheard voices. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't funded by some Silicon Valley firm, but it was hers, and it was working. She didn't know yet that one day it would take her back to a stage, back to a room full of cameras, and back to him. But before any of that, there were years of quiet grind. No applause, no spotlight. Just Naomi working behind screens, painting other people's truths, while still learning how to live fully in her own. She kept her name off the early work. For a long time, she didn't want to be seen, at least not the way she had been that night in the cafe. But gradually, the more she shared, the more people started to connect, not just with her style, but with the feeling behind every line. There was a rawness to it, a kind of honesty people weren't used to seeing in digital spaces. That became her signature. And eventually, her name returned to her work, not hidden this time, but proudly signed in the corner. Naomi Carter. The turning point came 2 years after the night Brandon humiliated her. A popular mental health collective reposted one of her pieces, a woman holding her own heart in her hands, cracked but not broken, stitched together with golden thread. The post went viral. Overnight, her inbox flooded with messages from teenagers, single moms, war veterans, corporate employees hiding their breakdowns in boardrooms. They all said the same thing in different words. "Thank you for drawing how I feel." From there, everything grew. She started doing interviews, workshops, community murals. Brands reached out. Nonprofits asked her to design campaigns. But Naomi said yes only to the ones that aligned with what she'd rebuilt her life around: integrity, empathy, and purpose. She'd learned the hard way that chasing visibility meant nothing if the light wasn't coming from within. 3 years in, she co-founded a digital storytelling studio focused on underrepresented voices. She mentored young artists from underserved communities, taught creative resilience in schools, and used part of her income to fund scholarships for girls who, like her, had once been told to be realistic. Her face was still mostly unknown to the public. She rarely showed herself in front of the camera. What mattered to her was the impact, not the image. But one day, a producer from a well-known startup competition show reached out. They'd been following her work for months. They were launching a new season focused on mission-driven entrepreneurship and wanted her as a guest judge. At first, Naomi hesitated. She wasn't sure she belonged in that world, the lights, the noise, the business lingo. But something in her said yes, maybe because she knew how powerful it was to be the voice in the room that didn't sound like everyone else. Maybe because a part of her wanted to prove to herself more than anyone that she could sit at any table now and not shrink. The night before filming, she stayed up late preparing questions for the contestants. She didn't think about who might be pitching. She had no reason to, but fate isn't always subtle. The next morning, Naomi walked onto the set in a cream blazer, her curls pulled back, a warm-toned notebook in her hand. She smiled politely at the other judges, nodded at the producers, and took her seat under the bright studio lights. It wasn't until halfway through the taping, when the next name was called, that her heart gave the smallest stutter. Up next, Brandon Kingsley, founder of Clarity Tech. She didn't react outwardly. Her face remained composed. Her hands didn't flinch. But inside, something tightened. And then he walked in. Older, more serious. Still handsome, but the cockiness had dulled. There were faint shadows under his eyes, like he hadn't slept well in weeks. He looked around the room, then froze when his eyes landed on her. For a split second, Brandon's face changed. Recognition, disbelief, something like guilt. He wasn't prepared. Not for this. Not for her. Naomi, on the other hand, nodded, once cool, distant professional. If the moment shook her, no one could tell. Brandon cleared his throat and began his pitch. A tech platform focused on emotional well-being through AI. Irony, Naomi thought. He spoke with conviction, trying to hold his nerves together, but he kept glancing at her like the past was standing right there in front of him, refusing to fade. When he finished, the studio clapped politely. The host turned to the judges. And Naomi looked down at her notebook, flipped to a clean page, and slowly lifted her pen. She hadn't expected to see him again, but now that he was here, sitting on the other side of the table, she finally understood he was no longer the boy who broke her, and she was no longer the girl he could play. Brandon stood beside the screen as the judges gathered their thoughts. He kept his posture, upright, hands folded in front of him, but his eyes flicked toward Naomi every few seconds, like he couldn't stop himself. Maybe he thought she'd call him out right there on national television. Maybe he was waiting for the collapse. But Naomi didn't look at him. Not yet. One of the other judges leaned in first, offering polite feedback about market scalability and user engagement. Another mentioned brand clarity. Brandon nodded, took notes, said thank you, with a tight, careful smile. Then the host turned toward Naomi. Naomi, any thoughts? She didn't answer right away. She lifted her gaze slowly from her notes and looked at Brandon. Really looked at him for the first time since he walked in. Her eyes were steady, not angry, not cold, just clear, like she'd already done the work of forgiving the past long before this moment arrived. He swallowed. I think she said, her voice calm but rooted, that emotional well-being is more than just an algorithm. It requires accountability and intention. The air shifted. Brandon's shoulders stiffened slightly, but Naomi didn't stop there. Sometimes people build things to fix the damage they've caused or avoid it, she continued. But healing doesn't come from fixing others. It starts when you stop hiding from who you used to be. The room went silent. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't name names. But the words didn't need names. She could have torn him apart right then. Everyone watching would have cheered her on. But Naomi wasn't here to get even. She was here because she'd already risen. Brandon stood still, eyes lowered now, almost like he'd heard those words before. Just not like this. Not when they were coming from a woman who no longer needed his validation to stand tall. The host cleared their throat awkwardly, and the other judges moved on to discuss investment terms. Naomi stayed quiet. Her piece had already been said, and truthfully, there wasn't much else that needed saying. When the segment wrapped and the cameras cut, the contestants were ushered out of the studio for a break. Naomi stepped backstage to grab water, pulling her hair back into a loose tie as she leaned against the wall. She didn't expect him to follow, but he did, Naomi, Brandon said just above a whisper. She turned expression unreadable, not surprised, not particularly interested, just present. I didn't know you'd be here, he said, voice softer than she remembered it ever being. I figured, she replied. There was a long pause. I was going to say something. About before, about everything. He started, eyes searching hers. But then you said what you said, and I realized. Maybe I already heard it. Naomi studied him for a moment. He looked smaller somehow, like someone who finally understood the size of his own consequences. She nodded once. Not in forgiveness, not in approval, but in closure. I wish you well, Brandon, she said, but we don't owe each other anything anymore. And with that, she stepped past him and walked down the corridor, shoulders steady, heart light. Outside, the sun was just beginning to set, throwing long shadows across the pavement. Naomi looked up at the sky, the same city above her, but everything beneath her feet had changed. She didn't need applause. She didn't need revenge. She had reclaimed the one thing they never expected her to own, the narrative. Backstage, Naomi slipped out of the blazer and exhaled like she had been holding her breath for years. The lights, the cameras, the eyes, none of it shook her the way she once feared it might. If anything, she felt lighter. Not because Brandon had finally heard what he needed to, but because she no longer needed him to. That evening, walking through the parking lot, she pulled her hair loose and let the cool air touch her skin. LA smelled like smog and jasmine, odd but somehow fitting. She drove home with the radio off, not because she was sad, but because silence now felt like space, not a void. She didn't go online that night. She didn't reread her words or replay the moment. She'd said what needed to be said for herself and maybe for others watching who had once been made to feel small. That was enough. But the world, it turns out, was watching. Within hours of the episode airing, clips of her response had spread across platforms. People didn't just share it, they felt it. The comment sections overflowed with strangers saying, "She said what I've never had the words for." Others simply wrote, "Thank you." But Naomi didn't measure success by virality. What moved her were the quiet messages, the girl who said she dropped out of art school after someone told her she wasn't marketable. The single dad who said he finally saw the harm in treating women as conquests. The college student who said they'd been laughed at for dreaming too loud. Her inbox became a kind of refuge, a testament to the fact that what people remember most isn't the power you project, but the truth you carry with you. She responded to as many messages as she could, not with platitudes, but with honesty, with warmth. She knew what it felt like to reach out and hear nothing back. She wouldn't be another closed door. A week later, she was invited to speak at a local art school, just a small group of students, mostly first-gen kids, nervous and full of fire. They asked her about her journey, about what it felt like to go from heartbreak to healing. Naomi didn't dress up the story. She told it as it was. Because what people need isn't a perfect narrative, they need permission to be real. What would you tell the version of yourself back then? A girl asked, notebook open on her lap. Naomi paused for a moment, then smiled softly. I'd tell her that being broken by someone's game doesn't mean you lose. Sometimes the real win is learning you don't have to play at all. That answer hung in the air like light through stained glass, quiet but unforgettable. In time, Brandon faded from the public eye. His startup was acquired but never scaled. Naomi never checked in on him. She didn't need to. He had been a chapter, not the story. Her life became fuller, not just with success, but with depth. She taught. She mentored. She built programs for girls like her, girls with dreams too big for the boxes they were handed. And through it all, she kept creating. Not to prove anything anymore, just to live honestly. She no longer needed to be heard to feel whole. She was whole. Thank you for staying with Naomi's story until the end. If you've ever felt like your voice was dismissed, your heart mishandled, or your dreams belittled, this story is a reminder you are not the joke, and your life is not the bet. You don't have to get even. You just have to keep growing. If this story meant something to you, we hope you'll share it with someone who needs it, with someone who once forgot their worth. And if you're still finding your voice, know this, it's already inside you. It always was. Thanks for watching. Be kind, be real, and keep choosing yourself.